What if I told you the most breathtaking spot in Florida has 0 reviews, 0 signs, and locals will give you fake directions if you ask? There's an unspoken code here. Outsiders aren't supposed to find these places, but someone finally broke that code, and now everything changes. Florida has a cave with a swimming pool inside it. Not a man-made pool, a prehistoric spring that's been hiding underground for millions of years. Devil's Den in Williston looks like something from a fantasy novel. You descend wooden stairs into the earth, and suddenly you're standing in this massive cavern with crystal clear water. There's a hole in the roof where sunlight streams down, creating this ethereal spotlight effect on the surface. It's basically nature's own skylight. The water stays 72 degrees year-round, every single day. Florida summers hit 100 degrees and people are melting on beaches. But down here, perfect swimming temperature. Winter comes around and the water feels warm by comparison. Mother Nature's thermostat actually works, unlike mine. Here's where it gets wild. Scientists have pulled fossils out of this spring dating back 33 million years. We're talking mastodons, giant ground sloths, animals that make modern Florida wildlife look boring. And trust me, modern Florida wildlife is already pretty weird. The spring pumps 12 million gallons of water daily. 12 million. Yet most tourists blast down I-75 toward overpriced theme parks without knowing it exists. Their loss, honestly. Want to learn scuba diving? This is one of the most unique training spots in America. No ocean currents trying to sweep you away. No murky visibility making you wonder what's lurking nearby. Just clear, calm water and ancient limestone walls. But here's the real secret. Show up before 10 in the morning. The cave limits how many people can enter at once, so early birds basically get a private underground oasis. It's the closest thing to owning a prehistoric swimming hole without the prehistoric price tag. Speaking of remote destinations most people never reach, there's a fortress sitting 70 miles into the Gulf of Mexico. 70 miles west of Key West sits a park that 99% of Florida visitors will never see. And honestly, that's exactly how the locals like it. Dry Tortugas isn't hard to reach because it's boring. It's hard to reach because you need a seaplane or a 2.5-hour ferry ride through open ocean. No bridges, no causeways, just you and the Gulf of Mexico. But here's what's waiting. Fort Jefferson, the largest masonry structure in the entire Americas. 16 million bricks stacked into a hexagonal fortress that was never actually finished and never fired a single shot in combat. The military spent 30 years building it, then basically abandoned the project. Your tax dollars at work since 1846. Now the history gets weird. Dr. Samuel Mudd, the physician who set John Wilkes Booth's broken leg after Lincoln's assassination, served his prison sentence right here. The cells still exist. You can stand in them. The snorkeling, though. This is where Dry Tortugas becomes unfair to everywhere else. Because the isolation means virtually untouched coral reefs. Sea turtles cruise past you like you're not even there. Nurse sharks, tropical fish in colors that look photoshopped. Yellowstone gets 4 million visitors annually. Dry Tortugas, about 70,000. The water clarity rivals anything in the Caribbean, yet most Americans have never heard of it. And overnight camping, Garden Key lets you sleep under stars with 0 light pollution. Pure darkness, the kind our grandparents actually grew up with. But you bring everything. Food, water, supplies. The island provides nothing except beauty. Speaking of Florida springs that outshine their famous competitors, there's one that pumps 400 million gallons daily while tourists keep flocking to the overcrowded alternative. Now here's a spring that locals genuinely try to keep quiet about. Rainbow Springs pumps out over 400 million gallons of water daily. That's not a typo, 400 million, making it Florida's 4th largest spring system with visibility reaching 100 feet deep. You can literally see fish that are swimming the length of a basketball court away from you. But here's what makes it special. Unlike Silver Springs with its commercialized glass-bottom boat tours and gift shops selling overpriced alligator keychains, Rainbow Springs lets you swim directly in the head springs. The admission? Just a few bucks. My wallet actually stayed in my pocket long enough to grow mold. And the weird part is, this place used to be famous. Back in the 1930s, a full-blown tourist attraction operated here with elaborate gardens, cascading waterfalls, and, believe it or not, a rodeo. Then it closed in 1974. Nature basically said, "Mine now," and swallowed everything back up. Those man-made waterfalls from the old attraction, still there, still cascading along hiking trails. They look like something you'd find in Costa Rica, not Central Florida. Want something even better? The tubing experience takes about 3 hours floating down the Rainbow River. You'll drift past neighborhoods where locals actually wave from their docks. It's like being in a parade where you're the only float and everyone's genuinely happy to see you. Winter months bring manatees migrating upstream. Unlike Crystal River, where you're fighting 20 other kayakers for a glimpse, here you can watch these gentle giants without someone's paddle smacking your face. Speaking of communities that protect their secrets, there's a tiny town nearby where the residents don't just talk to each other. They talk to people who aren't exactly alive anymore. All right, let's talk about the strangest zip code in Florida. Casadaga was founded in 1894, not as a town, as a destination for people who talk to dead people professionally. And here's the kicker. It's still operating exactly that way over a century later. About 100 certified mediums live here year-round. That's not a typo. 100 psychics in a town smaller than most high school graduating classes. Now, I've visited plenty of quirky Florida spots, but walking into Casadaga feels different. The Spanish moss hangs so thick it blocks the sunlight. The streets are quiet. Too quiet. Like the whole town knows something you don't. Want a reading? Just walk into the community bookstore and sign up. No appointment needed, no creepy carnival tent, just a clipboard and a waiting room that looks like your grandmother's living room. But here's where it gets interesting. The Southern Casadaga Spiritualist Camp Association actually tests their mediums before certification. This isn't some tourist trap where anybody with a crystal ball can charge $50 to guess your dead aunt's name. These folks take their ghost conversations seriously. The Casadaga Hotel supposedly ranks among Florida's most haunted buildings. Guests report rocking chairs moving on their own, phantom cigar smoke in non-smoking rooms. The front desk doesn't even flinch when you mention it anymore. And the weird part? The entire town sits inside what believers call an energy vortex. Skeptics say it's just the oak trees making everything dark and spooky. Believers say the trees grew that way because of the vortex. Either way, walking tours cost less than a theme park churro. Speaking of places that shouldn't exist in modern Florida, wait until you see what happens when the ocean decides to fight back against solid rock. 50 feet. That's how high seawater shoots through ancient rock when conditions align perfectly at Blowing Rocks Preserve. Most beaches just sit there. This one fights back. The Anastasia Limestone Formation stretching along this Jupiter Island shoreline took millions of years to form. Compressed shells, sand, and time created rock riddled with holes and crevices. When high tide meets strong easterly winds, the ocean forces itself through those openings like nature's own pressure washer. And the result? Geysers. Actual ocean geysers exploding skyward along an entire mile of coastline. Here's what makes this even better. This preserve sits on Jupiter Island, home to some of America's wealthiest families. Billionaires pay millions for waterfront mansions nearby, yet the preserve charges nothing. Free parking, no admission fee. Just show up. The restoration work happening here quietly undoes decades of Florida's mistakes. Staff removed invasive plants, choking the original dune ecosystem. Now, native species are returning. Sea turtles nest along this beach by the thousands annually, monitored carefully without the circus atmosphere of more famous nesting sites. But wait until low tide. The receding water reveals tidal pools scattered across the limestone. Starfish, sea urchins, small crabs scuttling between crevices. It's basically a free aquarium where you can actually touch things. Kids go absolutely crazy for it. Adults too, honestly. I spent an entire afternoon once just watching one sea urchin slowly navigate a pool the size of a dinner plate. Riveting stuff? Not exactly. Peaceful? Completely. The timing matters though. High tide brings the explosions. Low tide brings the exploration. Check the charts before visiting, or you'll get neither. Now, speaking of unexpected Florida discoveries, there's a state park hiding something far stranger than exploding rocks. An entire community that believed they lived inside the earth. In 1894, a man named Cyrus Teed convinced hundreds of people to follow him to the Florida wilderness. His pitch? Earth is actually hollow, and we're all living on the inside surface like ants on the inner wall of a basketball. Wild, right? Teed called himself Koresh and built an entire commune near what's now Estero. And here's what gets me. These weren't uneducated folks stumbling through the swamp. They constructed a settlement with a working bakery, a printing press, and an electrical generator. Most Florida towns didn't have electricity yet. This cult did. The community grew to 250 members at its peak. They shared everything, worked together, and genuinely believed the sun floated at Earth's hollow center while we walked around the interior shell. Teed even designed experiments to prove his theory. The experiments failed, obviously, but the dedication? Almost impressive. Now here's the part that doomed them. Celibacy. Mandatory for all members. No exceptions. You can probably guess what happened next. No new babies meant no new members. The community aged, shrank, and eventually faded away. Not with drama or scandal, just quietly, like a candle burning down. But 11 original buildings survived. You can actually walk through the founder's home where, according to local legend, followers kept Teed's body in a bathtub after he died. They were waiting for his resurrection. A hurricane finally washed the body away. The Estero River flows right through the park, offering kayaking through mangrove tunnels without fighting 20 other rental kayaks for space. Rangers lead tours that treat the whole story with genuine curiosity rather than mockery. Speaking of Florida communities with unusual histories, there's an island town nearby where time stopped completely. And I mean completely. Cedar Key has 700 residents. That's it, not 7,000. 700 people living on a cluster of tiny islands where the biggest decision anyone makes is whether to have fried clams or steamed clams for dinner. Here's the thing about this place. It used to be the pencil capital of America. Seriously. Back in the late 1800s, factories here churned out pencils by the millions because cedar trees grew everywhere. Then they cut down all the trees. Whoops. What happens when your entire economy vanishes overnight? Apparently, you just stop. The town froze somewhere around 1953 and nobody bothered to thaw it out. Walk down the main street and you won't find a single chain restaurant. No golden arches, no Mermaid Coffee logo, nothing. Every business is locally owned, which sounds like a marketing gimmick until you realize they couldn't attract franchises if they tried. The island sits too far off the highway for corporate America to care. But the clams. Oh, the clams. After pencils died, locals started farming clams in the surrounding waters. Today, Cedar Key produces 90% of Florida's cultivated clams. These aren't the rubbery things you get at chain restaurants. They're pulled from the Gulf that morning and served by people who probably know the guy who harvested them. Artists discovered the town in the 70s when waterfront property cost basically nothing. Now, there are galleries selling legitimate artwork sandwiched between bait shops. It's weird. It works. And the sunsets from the public dock? They rival Key West without the cruise ship passengers, drunk tourists screaming, or $18 cocktails draining your wallet. The roads flood during king tides. Locals just keep drinking on their elevated porches. Speaking of communities that refuse to change, the next town took isolation to an entirely different level. 6 major springs. That's not a typo. 6 different crystal clear springs merged together to create what might be Florida's most perfect lazy river. The Ichitucknee pumps out so much fresh water that you can literally count individual scales on fish swimming beneath your inner tube. No exaggeration. The clarity here makes swimming pools look murky by comparison. Now here's where it gets interesting. The head spring stays locked at 72 degrees year-round. January tubing? Absolutely possible. You'll curse the cold for about 30 seconds getting in, then wonder why you ever bothered with heated pools. But there's a catch. Florida isn't stupid. They figured out this place was too good to leave unprotected. So during summer months, the state caps daily visitors. Hit the park after 10 a.m., you might get turned away at the gate entirely. Your minivan full of kids and disappointment heading right back to the interstate. The full float takes roughly 3 hours, and here's the logistical puzzle that trips people up. You end at a completely different parking lot than where you started. Either bring 2 cars, sweet talk a friend into shuttle duty, or use the park's bus service. Your call, indigenous people figured out this corridor 12,000 years ago. Archaeological teams have pulled projectile points and stone tools from these riverbanks. So when you're floating past, sipping whatever you smuggled in your cooler, Just remember you're drifting through a highway that predates European civilization by millennia. Unlike those artificial resort lazy rivers with their chlorine smell and screaming toddlers, the Ichetucknee does all the work naturally. Just birds, gentle splashing, and the occasional tourist complaining about cold water. Speaking of underappreciated Florida destinations, there's a small town in the Panhandle where the oysters practically harvest themselves. Most Floridians couldn't point to Apalachicola on a map. And honestly, that's exactly how the locals want it. This tiny panhandle town produces 90% of Florida's oysters. Not a typo. 9 out of every 10 oysters harvested in the state come from this one bay, pulled up using techniques that haven't changed since the 1800s. Guys still go out in small boats, use hand tongs, and work the same beds their grandfathers worked. The downtown looks like someone hit pause in 1950 and forgot to press play again. 900 historic buildings packed into a few blocks. More pre-Civil War structures per capita than almost anywhere else in Florida. Most tourists blast right through on Highway 98, probably racing to some overpriced beach resort that looks identical to every other overpriced beach resort. Their loss. Here's something wild. A doctor named John Gorey invented mechanical refrigeration right here in 1851. He was trying to cool down yellow fever patients and accidentally changed human civilization forever. His original ice machine prototype sits in a museum smaller than most gas station bathrooms. The man who made air conditioning possible, and his invention is displayed in a building tourists walk past without a second glance. Now about those oysters. Raw oysters at Apalachicola restaurants cost roughly half what Miami or Tampa charges. Same quality. Actually better quality since they're pulled from the water that morning instead of sitting in a truck for 3 days. The town even appeared in The Truman Show because filmmakers needed somewhere that looked old-fashioned. They barely had to decorate anything. Commercial development never found this place because the river kept it isolated. Pure accident. Pure luck. But speaking of places frozen in time, there's one Florida attraction that's been doing the exact same show since 1947. Now we've saved the strangest for last, and honestly, this one feels like a fever dream that refused to end. Since 1947, women dressed as mermaids have been performing underwater shows at Weeki Wachee Springs. That's over 75 years of synchronized swimming in fishtails. Your grandmother could have watched the same show you're watching today. The performers don't use scuba tanks. They breathe through air hoses hidden around the underwater theater, holding their breath between stations while executing choreographed routines. It's basically underwater ballet mixed with breath-holding competitions in 74-degree spring water every single day. Here's where it gets interesting. The attraction almost died in the 2000s. Attendance dropped, the park struggled, and mermaids nearly went extinct in Florida. Then the state government stepped in and bought it. Weeki Wachee became an official state park in 2008. That decision changed everything. Admission dropped from over $40 to around $15. Suddenly, families could afford to watch mermaids again. The spring itself remains one of America's deepest. Divers have gone past 400 feet without hitting bottom. Nobody actually knows how deep it goes. The mermaids swim in an abyss that scientists haven't fully mapped. But the wildest part? Original performers from the 1950s still return for reunion shows. We're talking women in their 80s putting on tails and swimming in the same theater where they performed during the Eisenhower administration. That's not nostalgia. That's dedication bordering on supernatural. Your admission includes a water park, kayaking, and wildlife tours. It's legitimately Florida's best entertainment value. So there you have it, 10 places most tourists will never find, hidden in plain sight across the Sunshine State. The locals know. Now you do too.